Hey everyone, this is John Girardi giving you the preview for the John Girardi Show this evening. You can listen to the John Girardi Show Monday through Friday from 6 to 7 p.m. on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400, 96.7 in Fresno, AM 1400 Visalia. You can also catch the show on powertalk967.com, powertalk967.com, or get the show from the iHeart app or Apple Podcasts as a podcast. Today on the show, we've got a couple of things. First, we're breaking down some kind of disappointing Supreme Court decisions looking at election law shenanigans that are happening in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. Basically, Brett Kavanaugh and John Roberts joined with the liberals to say they're not going to consider challenges to, in Pennsylvania, some nonsense that the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court did. Basically, they're saying we're going to keep counting ballots until 3 days after the election, mail-in ballots, even if they don't have a postmark on them. And then that was just decided by the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court. Oh, we need to do this because of coronavirus, which is nonsense. The North Carolina Board of Elections, this unelected board, decided that they're going to keep counting ballots for 9 days after the election, but as long as it's postmarked by Election Day, so maybe not quite as egregious. And the court basically punted. They said, we're not going to consider this now. They were 5-3 decisions. I think Kavanaugh was providing cover for Barrett. Barrett didn't participate in them, presumably because she just got on, maybe hadn't had time to get briefed, and her participation was unnecessary because Kavanaugh changed his vote. So it's kind of dangerous. Basically, this might mean that the court will have to decide these cases after the election in a kind of Bush v. Gore situation if things are close and the election is hanging on Pennsylvania and or North Carolina. So that's really kind of worrisome. I don't know. I think John Roberts is being cowed by these Democrat threats that they're going to pack the court. So he's trying everything possible not to appear to be a partisan. And, it's sort of similar to what happened in 1937 when Roosevelt threatened to pack the court. One of the justices on the Supreme Court who had been ruling against all of his New Deal policies suddenly changed his mind and started okaying all of his New Deal policies. So even though Roosevelt didn't successfully pack the court, he still got what he wanted. Instead of a bunch of 5-4 losses blocking New Deal legislation, he got a bunch of 5-4 wins, okaying New Deal legislation. And it was called the switch in time that saved 9 when Justice Owen Roberts changed his vote. Owen Roberts? Anyway, I can't quite remember his name. So I think that might be what's happening now. So I guess we'll see. The outcome of the election, if it goes to the Supreme Court, boy, Democrats are going to be even more angry than they would be if they had decided this beforehand. And it's just outrageous that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court or this board in North Carolina is changing all these election rules. That's the role of a state legislature. State legislatures are supposed to set the rules for the election in a way that accords with federal law, especially when you're dealing with federal elections like a race where the presidency is being decided. It's totally, I think Roberts and Kavanaugh knows this, and Roberts should know this, that it's totally unlawful. In fact, the Constitution itself says that it's state legislatures who are supposed to set these rules through the normal process, of their state legislative houses voting for something and their governor signing off on it. It's not, it's not the role of courts to be, the charge that's going to come against conservatives is that how come you guys just don't want to help people vote? There's a pandemic going on. Yeah. It's the role of the legislature to decide these things in the course of the pandemic. We've had a pandemic since April. These state legislatures have had months to make the rules for how the election's going to go, and they've decided this. It's not the role of the North Carolina Election Board or the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court to redo the work of the state legislature because they think it's insufficient. After that, on the show, we talked about the Equality Act. This is a piece of legislation that Biden says he's going to sign in his first 100 days in office. And what this would do is gut the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act basically beefs up the protections of the First Amendment so that in cases like, for example, cases where you have a Christian-owned bakery that doesn't want to bake custom cakes for gay weddings, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act sort of helps function to beef up their claim that, hey, I shouldn't be forced under state law to participate in this because it violates my conscientious rights, my religious rights. Basically, the Equality Act would totally eliminate those protections. It would also cut off federal funding for schools, particularly religious colleges, that have any kind of discriminatory policies against LGBT persons. So let's say Fresno Pacific, which has certain code of conduct policies that forbids same-sex activity among faculty, that doesn't offer its married student housing to same-sex married couples, Fresno Pacific would lose all of its federal funding. And it's sort of ignoring that, look, all this school wants to do, this private association wants to do, is be able to educate people while living out its creedal beliefs. And, in spite of the fact that a school like Fresno Pacific, and there are thousands of Catholic and Christian schools like this all over the country, Fresno Pacific does an enormous amount of good in the Valley. The number of first-generation college students that Fresno Pacific graduates, they graduate first-generation college students at a much better rate than Fresno State does, and than the national averages are. They do an enormous service in the Valley, and rely a lot on federal funding, either directly or indirectly through federal student loans and all kinds of things. So this would be an enormous change. And if Biden does this in his first 100 days, I mean, that would be a horrible, horrible step. So you can read the stories about that, about all those things. We've got pieces by Andy McCarthy and Denny Burke about the Equality Act and about the bad Supreme Court cases and the Equality Act, respectively. You can read those at twitter.com/FresnoJohnny. That's at FresnoJohnny. And I think that's going to do it for us. I'll see you on Monday with our next video for Monday's episode of The John Girardi Show.